You need to start with yourself and figure out, who do you want to serve? What's your goal? Why do you get aesthetic treatments? I know what I do. My ideal client now is my clients who are in their 40s to 60s, who have maybe struggled in relationships and are trying to better themselves, and they want to start with one place. And I believe in educating these women so that they can make an empowered choice on how to make themselves a little bit better on the inside and the outside.
All right, welcome to the Medical Entrepreneur Podcast. We have a special guest on today, Miss Tara Phelps. So proud to have her here. Tara, can you tell us a little bit more kind of about your background and where you came from?
So currently I am a nurse anesthetist. I've been doing that since 2010, and I've been a nurse since 2021.
And then where did you grow up?
I grew up in Windsor, Locks, Connecticut, which is a not a very wealthy town. It's surrounded by tobacco fields. I grew up not very wealthy. My parents met at a very young age, and from as long as I can remember, my dad always had 3 jobs, and we were always taught that if you want something, you have to start working for it. So I started working at age 14, picking corn and tobacco. That was my first job.
Wow. That's incredible. So you'd actually go out to the fields and pick corn and tobacco as your first
4:30 in the
job.
morning, Richie the farmer would come by my house and put me in the back of the truck with all the other high school kids and drop us off. And we worked from 4:30 in the morning until about 11 a.m.
Wow, that's incredible. So it sounds like you grew up with a very strong work ethic. How did that lead? Like, as you got older, did that lead you to different opportunities? Did it make you?
So it did. And a lot of people don't know this about me, but I'm actually a former Division II college basketball player. I grew up mildly overweight, a little socially awkward. I got picked on a lot in school. And one of the things that saved me was basketball. I'm 5'10". I decided to try out for the basketball team, and I had raw talent. I wasn't very good, but I was bigger than all the other girls. So I managed to get the ball in the hoop, more often than not. So that around that time, women's college basketball was really starting to take off. It was the time of like UConn women's basketball. They won like all these championships, and I really wanted to play college basketball. And I was told by my middle school coach that I would never be able to accomplish that. And that's probably one of the best things you can tell me, is that I can't do something, because then I immediately go to watch me. And I did. I started playing with boys every day. My parents signed me up for AAU basketball. I played on the weekends. And by my junior year in high school, I had received offers from multiple colleges to go play for them.
Wow, that's incredible. And I love the fact that like the whole thing that spurred you was someone telling you couldn't do it,
Absolutely. That's always been the one thing that has pushed me to go beyond my limits.
And what I commonly see with entrepreneurs is that many entrepreneurs are actually former athletes. And it's a very high correlation between those that have actually won things, like whether it's a division, champion or a state title. I always find those kind of people, entrepreneurs, are very successful. Did you find that sports taught you a lot of lessons in your life?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest things I always tell people is my college career was focused on living a balanced life. We had a rigorous schedule. You got up at 5 a.m. You went and played basketball for 2 hours. Then you went to class at 8:30 a.m. Went to class until about 3 p.m. And then you had lifting, and then you had mandatory study hours, and then you had curfew, and you had to have dinner with the team. So you really had to find pockets of time to get your studying done, because we also had to maintain a GPA greater than 3.4.
Wow. A true athlete and student, that's incredible.
Yeah. Multitasking was probably the biggest lesson I've learned from being an athlete.
And is there anything that you learned in terms of like the ability to deal with failure or hardship throughout your sports?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that happened when I was a junior in college was I got replaced by someone who was taller than me. There's nothing you can do about that. I was a power forward, and they brought in a girl who was 6'1", and I lost my starting position. And you kind of have to figure out, all right, what am I going to do with this information? So I started lifting, working out, focusing on my grades, because I knew I wasn't going to play basketball after college. So I just shifted my mindset into putting my energy elsewhere. I still was there for the team, but I knew that wasn't going to be my everything.
Man, that's always a really great lesson, And I love to see the stories of, you see the stories like Michael Jordan and, kind of like all these famous, players, and how they have these amazing work ethics, And so it sounds like you have very similar work ethic as well, you know.
Yes.
Well, how did you go from being this athlete and very hard worker to like going into healthcare? What made you want to help people and go into
So I had
healthcare?
a very convoluted entry into healthcare. It was actually accidental. And it's kind of an interesting story. So I had a degree in biology and I thought I wanted to teach. And I ended up getting a job in an inner city middle school after high school, or after college, I mean. And I had no idea how to discipline kids at that level. I was teaching middle school. I was also teaching Latin, which I have no experience in. I was studying the night before and creating a lesson plan the next day. And I actually got fired from my job because one of the days the kids were kind of acting unruly. And I was 22. I had no idea what I was doing. And I swore at them. And apparently, you're not supposed to do that. And so I lost my job. so I, and I always believe, getting fired or having a failure is actually, it redirects you into the right path. So I was at home, and at the time, my dad had testicular cancer. He was a police officer, he used to keep the radar gun in his lap. And so he was undergoing chemotherapy treatments and he was really sick. And I was kind of helping him at home and trying to figure out my next step. And he was like, why don't you become a nurse or a physician's assistant? So I applied to physician's assistant school first. And I didn't get in because I didn't have any background in healthcare. So I applied to nursing school. I went to University of Amherst, got my second degree in nursing, and then immediately went into pediatrics.
What brought you into pediatrics?
I have a goofy personality. So even though I'm not great at teaching kids, I am the queen of like terrible dad jokes. And so I know how to make kids feel comfortable and I'm playful and I do better with like young kids and messing around than I do with adults.
I totally get that. I always find pediatrics to be kind of more fun to practice in, you
Yeah,
know?
they're more
It's just,
resilient than
yeah.
adults.
And then you went from that. So then after you became a nurse, then how did you become a nurse anesthetist? Like what drew you into the field of
So
anesthesia?
I was married and I had a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old, and my marriage did not work out. And I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. And my mom was a psychologist and she was talking to me and she was like, I just heard about this career called nursing anesthesia. It's heavily science based. You have a degree in biology. I feel like this would be a good path for you, and you would never have to worry about, getting married or not getting married and having a second stream of income. You could take care of the kids by yourself and proceed. So, I got divorced and I entered anesthesia school as a single mom with a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old, and it was probably one of the hardest things I've
Whoa.
ever done.
Yeah, that's definitely a huge challenge because you're basically managing the children and also doing what's considered a very difficult training,
Yeah,
you know?
I actually, so my parents were living in Connecticut at the time. I was living in Rhode Island. I shipped my kids to live with my parents in Connecticut. I went to school during the week, did my clinicals, and then I would work night shifts on Friday and Saturday night, and then I would see my kids on Sunday. And that's what I did for
Wow.
3 years. I took loans out and accumulated some educational debt, but we're paying it off now.
Man, that goes to show your level of dedication. That's amazing, you know? So impressive. And then, well, how did you go from being a CRNA or a nurse I guess there's nurse anesthesiologist now, right?
Yes.
So, how do you go from being a CRNA into aesthetics? Like, what got you interested in the aesthetics journey, the aesthetics field?
So there's two sides to this story. So the first story is, I think I told you earlier, when I was younger going into basketball, I was overweight and kind of socially challenged, I guess you would say. And I became fascinated with health and appearances over time. I actually struggled with a little bit of anorexia in college. And so I've always been fascinated with that world of having to improve yourself. And during COVID, we shut down elective surgery in March, and I had two options. One, you could go home and take the free money that the government was giving you, or you could go work in the ICU. So I chose to go work in the ICU. I just felt like it was the ethical thing to do. And I got my pay cut in half.
And you never take the easy
I
way,
never
can I
take the
just
easy way.
say?
I'm not someone that can sit around and like not do anything. I'm like, I have a skill, I should use it. So I went worked in the ICU. I got my pay cut in half, and I was frustrated. I was like, God, when is this going to end? How am I going to pay my bills? And I was talking to my hairdresser, who I've been going to for 17 years, and we always talk business and how to go forward. And she was like, you know what? You've always been interested in aesthetics. And she's like, I would never let anyone else touch my face except you. She's like, you're one of the smartest people I know. You have all these like skill sets behind you. And that just sent off a little alarm bell in my brain. And I started thinking about like, how can I do this? How can I get into this?
Man, that is awesome. And then, did you feel that once you started to, obviously you cared about the field of aesthetics, and then what was kind of like your reason why, or what brought you into aesthetics, like in terms of the patient care?
So my mission statement in my business that I always tell my clients is I want to make people feel comfortable in their own skin because I spent so many years feeling uncomfortable in my own skin. So I think aesthetics is for everybody. I don't think it's limited to women or men who are wealthy and have money. I think at some degree we all want to feel good about ourselves. And the key, the secret sauce that I have is I am very good at developing a relationship with people in the first 5 minutes. I am easy to talk to. People tell me their life story within 10 minutes, and I'm like, oh God, there's like so many secrets I have being in this position. And I think the key is listening to why someone is there, why they want to look better and feel better, and starting where they're comfortable starting, like figuring out where they're at and figuring out what's the next logical step for them to feel better and not just treating them as a body part.
Absolutely. And then, did you feel like, I guess, once you got into aesthetics, obviously you had to learn a lot of new skill sets. It was almost like kind of starting over in a way. You did all this training. How did you find that, I guess, for a lot of people, they do their training and then they kind of plateau. It sounds like for you, you're always seeking that challenge.
Yeah, and I was fortunate enough that I worked at a trauma hospital from 2010 to 2016, and then I moved to Southern Rhode Island and started working at a community hospital that was heavily based in regional anesthesia. So, and I had not gotten that opportunity to do that at the trauma hospital. I was great at taking care of, your Saturday night specials who came in with a gunshot wound, but I didn't know how to do a block. And so when I first started there, my boss was like, well, I'll do all the blocks and, you just sit in the room. And I was like, no, if you want to hire me, I want to learn everything. I do not want to not know how to do something. So he started training me and I learned how to do spinals, epidurals, brachial plexus blocks, everything, adductor canal blocks. And so I got very comfortable using ultrasound. And I think that's a beautiful transition into aesthetics because I think that's where we're actually headed into the aesthetic world is using more ultrasound guided injections.
Amen. And also just the skill set you develop with that needle, because to do those blocks, to do intraneural catheters, to like, for example, a brachial plexus block that you describe, I mean, you have to have very good, fine motor movements to do those things. So that was probably the best training ever for aesthetics. Yeah.
I mean, who knew? I mean, I feel like my whole life has like accidentally led me into the next thing in a really beautiful transition.
Steve Jobs always said, you can't ever see the path looking forward, but when you look backwards, you can see how every little step lined up to bring you to where you are.
Exactly.
And it seems like that's maybe your story
Thank
as
God
well.
I got fired as a teacher. I was much better at putting kids to sleep.
And who knows? From what I see these days, that may be required just to like get those kids in order. Well, if you don't mind, one of the things I was going to ask you is, obviously, from your description of your aesthetics practice and how it's for everybody, it really strikes a note with me because I find the same thing. A lot of people think aesthetics is vanity. They think it's fake. They think it's plastic surgery. They have this kind of, idea in their head of like somebody who's like overdone or
Yeah.
overcorrected. And can you maybe tell a story of how, maybe one of your patients that you were able to treat, you had kind of a transformational experience for them?
Yeah. I actually have a great story and I'll read a little bit of her testimonial if that's okay. Um,
Sure.
she was a surgical technician at the hospital that I work with, and she was bitten by a spider. And she ended up having modeling all down the side of her face. She had like redness, she had hypopigmentation. It was like this scarred area. She literally looked deformed. And she was talking about it to me one day in the locker room. And I was like, God, I got to help this girl, but I don't know if PRP microneedling will help her, but I got to try. And I also knew it wasn't in her budget. So one of the things that I do in my business is once every few months, I try to do at least one pro bono case where I experiment and try to see if I can help someone. So I knew she came from poverty. I knew she didn't have the money to come see me. And so I said, hey, listen, I think I can help you, but I can't guarantee results. I definitely can't change the hypopigmentation areas in your skin, but I can maybe change the texture and make this look better. And she had a great result. And so she wrote this. She wrote, for as long as I can remember, my mom has always made it a point to stress the importance of skincare. I was blessed to grow up with beautiful skin, having an occasional pimple appear on my face a few times a year. I managed to make it until my mid-30s before I had my first big struggle with my complexion. I was bit by a spider on the left side of my neck, which resulted in surgery a year later. About a year later after the surgery, I began to notice areas on my neck and the side of my face were losing pigment. I made an appointment with a dermatologist and was told it was melasma. Despite numerous treatments, facials, and creams, nothing was making a difference. I had begun to just accept that this was just the way I was going to look until Tara said she might be able to help me. I have been incredibly fortunate to work with and get to know Tara for several years and see firsthand how amazing and talented she truly is. When she said she might be able to help me, I didn't hesitate. She told me about the microneedling with PRP. She explained the entire process and I made my first appointment. My results beyond exceeded my expectations as I knew I was going to be a challenge. I did not expect to see results, but after the first treatment, my skin has looked and felt better than it has in over 10 years. Even all the lines on my forehead and around my eyes are practically gone. I am so thankful for Tara for giving me back my confidence and changing my life. So I think that's a great
Oh,
example of, she wasn't coming to me for vanity reasons. Like, she had a very traumatic thing that had happened to her and it was affecting how she showed up in the world. And sometimes I think aesthetic treatments, when done by the proper person and for the right reasons, can drastically change how someone shows up in the world and presents themselves.
100%. Would you say, like, if you were to examine her, kind of the way that she showed up in the world before your treatment and then after your treatment, could you maybe compare and contrast those two states?
Oh, absolutely. So she is currently living with her ex-husband and not, accepting like a lower rate of pay. And so once she was in my chair, not only did we talk microneedling, but we also talked about like how she showed up in the world. And I told her, I was like, you can be better than this. You can afford your own place, but your mindset is holding you back. And since her 3 treatments with me, she has now switched over into travel surgical tech and she's making more money. She has moved out of her house with her ex-husband and finally bought her first apartment. So I think a lot of times there's 2 ways you can show up in the world. You can either be a victim or you can take your circumstances and figure out like what am I going to learn from this to get to the next level?
That's a beautiful story, and I think that it really highlights the difference in, I've seen this so many times, in our med spa and other people's med spas as well, where, the people will go in for, an aesthetic treatment, and what happens is that the aesthetic treatment changes who they are fundamentally. Like, people forget that, like, there was a famous physician, Dr. Maxwell Maltz, who wrote a book called Psychocybernetics. I'm not sure if you ever had a chance to
No.
read it. But it's definitely one to check out. It's pretty old. But basically, he always talked about how our own internal self-image of ourselves is actually what drives the way that the world reacts to
Mm-hmm.
us. And so I think by helping that woman, not only sound like you sound like you were not only, and has also helped her with her treatment, but you're also like a mindset coach in a way. But I mean, look at the difference. She looks better. She feels better. She's achieving more. She has freedom and independence. She's escaped perhaps what is negative surroundings. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't sound too good to be living with somebody
Yeah.
divorced, And now she's free and standing on her own and independent. And that's all because of your
Yeah.
treatment and because you reached out. That's incredible, Tara. You're changing
Thank you.
lives. That's amazing. For those people that are, there's a lot of people that reach out to us on the podcast and they say, hey, I'm working at a hospital. I really hate my job. They're mistreating me. We've even had stories of one of a lady actually emailed us, and she was a nurse who worked on the floor, and she was saying that they were assigning her to patients that had psychiatric
Mm-hmm.
issues. but many times they wouldn't actually restrain these patients. And so she had had several times where her, attempts on her life were made, where someone tried to kill her, like literally kill her. And then she comes back the next day and she's assigned to the same patient who tried to kill her, stuff
Yeah.
like this. And so people are seeking ways out, but many people are afraid. And they look at you and they say, well, Tara, you're special. You were an athlete. You had a different mindset. You must be magical. You were CRNA. What would you tell somebody who's, maybe they're stuck in their job and they're too afraid to take the first step? What would you tell somebody like that?
So yes, I was an athlete, but I also in in my marriage, I had gotten myself into a lot of debt. I had no money to start with, like nothing. I had given up half of my retirement to this person, and I had gotten myself into some
Wow.
credit card debt. So I could have sat there and said, I don't have the ability to do this. When you actually sit down and you really think about what do I want to be in the next 5 years and what's the first aligned step that I can get to get closer to that goal. I'm not going to do, when you look at a goal of 5 years out, it can seem overwhelming, but sometimes you have to like work backwards. So I look at the goal 5 years from now and I'm like, all right, what do I need to do within 3 years? What do I need to do within 1 year? What do I need to do in the next month to get a little bit closer to that goal? And I knew that there was a way to come up with the money. And I had a retirement. And so I took money out of my retirement to get the business started. Is that the smartest decision? Probably not. I got taxed for it. But it was a means to an end. And I know that my business is growing and it's going to be successful and I will eventually like pay off my business investment. So I would say take the first aligned step. Like what's the next step you can take to get closer to what your dream is? But you have to know what your dream is.
And it's funny you mentioned the retirement thing because I was actually talking to a colleague of mine, and he's somebody I trained with, and he just never left the academic system. And so I always find it a joke because everybody's like, "Oh, you want to stay in the academic system because you get matching and retirement." And what's funny is they get a choice of three funds. That's it, like three. Like you have aggressive, moderate, and then like safe. You get a choice of three different things, and then the powers that be manage all your money and charge you fees, etc. And so he came to me, like, I think it was in 2022, so it was last year, and he was like, I got 5% return. And I was like, well, you realize inflation is like 10%, right? So you actually got a negative
Right.
5%. So it's, I would say that, that wasn't even necessarily a bad move because, now you have a business, that business is worth something. You now have a new opportunity to basically help other people that may end up turning out to be one of your best investments.
Mm-hmm.
It just depends on
Absolutely.
what time frame you look at it.
And I would probably say for this woman that contacted you, maybe her first aligned step is maybe she becomes a 1099 employee and decides where she's going to work and start there and just change your environment. Like maybe, okay, I'm not going to tolerate being treated like this. So maybe I go work in another unit that pays more. Maybe I become 1099. Maybe I become a travel nurse and start there and start setting money aside. Maybe that's the first aligned step towards a business.
I like the way you put that is, change your environment so that you can see things that are different. That's a really great point. And sometimes you're exactly right. Taking like small steps are easier, and then kind of from there you can go
Oh
forward,
yeah, I mean, I've done this completely messy. Like if there's a lot of times I can do the procedures, but there's times where I'm still learning. I just did my taxes for the first time as an S corporation, and the woman who did my taxes, she goes, "You don't know what you're doing on QuickBooks, do you?" And I was like, "Absolutely not." So now I know I'm going to take a tutorial on how to do my QuickBooks. So you're never going to know everything to be successful. Sometimes you're going to have, you make mistakes and you just have to decide, like, am I going to learn from this and become better? Or am I going to let this like hold me back? You can't know everything. You just have to start and do it messy.
Man, that's a really good life lesson. Is that they always say the ancient thing is like, whoever hesitates is lost, right? And I think there's something to that. It's like many times I find the people that are the most successful are those who, in some ways, are just bold enough to go forward, even if they don't have the answers, they'll just figure it out. So you bring up a really great point. And then, would you have any advice for those people who are considering going into aesthetics themselves? Like, what would they suggest? Or what would you suggest to somebody who's like, "Oh, I love aesthetics. I want to follow your pathway. How do I do that?"
Yeah. So I think there's people, a lot of people have a limiting belief when it comes to aesthetics because it's really easy to go on Instagram and look at all these different aesthetic influencers and be like, oh my God, I have to be like that in order to start my business. And the reality is, you don't. There is a ideal client for everybody. So you have to figure out you have to do a little bit of personal development about yourself and figure out who you are and who you actually want to serve and help, because there's a vast world of people that can come to your business. You don't have to be, the influencer on social media. So I would say you need to start with yourself and figure out, who do you want to serve? What's your goal? Why do you get aesthetic treatments? I know what I do. And that's now my ideal client now is my clients who are in their 40s to 60s, who have maybe struggled in relationships and are trying to better themselves, and they want to start with one place. And I believe in educating these women so that they can make an empowered choice on how to make themselves a little bit better on the inside and the outside.
I love that. Start with your mission first.
If you don't have a mission, then how do you know who to market to?
Exactly. That's so true. And then could you maybe talk a little bit more about your philosophy of aesthetics? Like when, so often, one thing that I would see is like people have these kind of preconceived notions about aesthetics. Some people are told, Botox is poison. People, see these, these kind of people that are the extremes where they have, cheeks that are out to here and the lips that are huge. Like what is your personal philosophy? When somebody comes to you and they come to you, they sit in your chair and they say, Tara, please help me. What is your philosophy, or what are your guiding principles to help someone?
My philosophy is twofold. One, it's education, because the reason we usually jump to conclusions is we have a knowledge deficit in that area, and we have a limited intake of information about that area of expertise. And then two, it's evidence-based. So I really believe in talking to my clients, getting to know them, educating them about what would probably be the right step for them, giving them realistic expectations about what I can really do for them so that they're not wasting their money, and relying on procedures that I know are based on the gold standard of evidence in what we do.
Man, that's beautiful. That's a really good point. And then is there any kind of like philosophy in terms of how people look? Like, is there a certain look that you're going for? Like if somebody comes in and says, "Hey, I want to look like Kim Kardashian," like what would you say to that?
Well, I mean, who doesn't want to look like Kim Kardashian? So usually my question is, I usually call it my come to Jesus moment with clients. Like when they come in with an expectation, I'm usually like, okay, let's have a talk. I'm like, I would like to look like Kim Kardashian too, but it's not in the cards. Like all I can do is look like the best version of Tara. So I usually try to get them back down to earth and say, like, what's the one area of your face or body that really bothers you, and let's start there.
Perfect. That's awesome. And then how do you see kind of your practice growing? Like what is your vision of your practice go in the future?
Oh, so my vision, by 2025, I want to be making $1 million a year. So that is on my vision board. I would like to have a women-owned medical spa that has mostly nurse anesthetists and physician assistants and nurse practitioners that I work with, and collaborating together, educating each other and educating our patients. I would like to continue that mission of doing like one pro bono case like quarterly to someone who really, needs an aesthetic treatment, but maybe really can't afford it. That's where I see myself. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I will. I have no doubt I will.
Absolutely. Always starts with the vision first, and then the steps will follow,
Yeah.
And then do you feel that your practice, like going forward, besides just doing aesthetics, do you feel like you'll be adding anything else to your practice, such as, weight loss, hormone replacement, these kind of things?
Yeah, funny that you should mention that. I actually signed up for a seminar this weekend to learn a little bit more about semaglutide and see if it's something that I could reasonably add to my current practice. I plan on going back to advanced training in the next 6 to 9 months. I would like to buy a device. I'm currently kind of interviewing my current client base and seeing like what's the thing that most people want. And I feel like that's going to guide me to the first device that I purchase.
Well, Tara, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been such a pleasure to hear your story and to see, what inspiration, and then I love that transformation that you made for that patient that got the spider bite. Like that was life changing, absolutely amazing.
Thank you very much for having me. This is an incredible experience.
Thank you.